together, Rookie, the Addams Family.
Hello from Mickey and from me from Castle Goring. Well, so many of you have requested that I go through Prince Andrew's answers to the accusations levelled against him in Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit, that I am going to do that. So without further ado, I am going to plunge right in, because we have rather too much ground to cover, and I am hoping we will be able to cover it all today. Okay. The nature of the action. Number one, this suit arises out of defendant's sexual abuse of plaintiff when she was under the age of 18. Well, Andrew's response couldn't be clearer. Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 1 of the complaint. Now, I ought to make it clear that when one is dealing with a lawsuit, it's not up to the defendant to prove the plaintiff's case. It's up to the plaintiff to prove the plaintiff's case. So there's often a narrative arc. In this instance, it's rather more like a book than a legal narrative arc. Because David Boys is very cleverly appealing to the prejudices and to the emotions of the general public, hoping that he will play upon every single prejudice in favour of his client, who, it has to be said, is an acknowledged, self-confessed liar and perjurer. So let's make that clear. He has an uphill struggle in a court of law where there is fair play, because his client has dirty hands. She doesn't come to the table with clean hands. But we'll get to that at the end of it all, because that's also brought into the lawsuit. I have to say, I'm very impressed with Andrew's lawyer's response. Number two, during 2000 to 2002, beginning when plaintiff was 16, plaintiff was the victim of sex trafficking and abuse by convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Well, right there they have a difficulty, because she is on record in writing and in sworn testimony asserting that she was 15 and on occasion maybe even younger. So right there, her credibility comes into question. What does a clever lawyer do in a situation like this? He saves the ammunition for trial, and he simply throws the ball back into her court. Not only has she lied, but she has actually lied rather sillily. But, so what does Andrew's lawyers have, what have they done? They've simply said, Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 2 of the complaint. They have nothing to do with him. The complaint in this aspect rarely has, well, she'd like to think it has something to do with him and like the court to believe that it does. But this is one lawsuit, and she's covering thousands, literally thousands of events. By her own account, 99.999% of which have absolutely nothing to do with him. So what does a clever lawyer do? Throw the ball back into her court. which is what he's done. And also, you see, if Andrew doesn't answer the questions very carefully and makes the slightest slip up, they are hovering and waiting, as everybody who knows anything about this case knows, desperate to charge him with a criminal offence, notwithstanding the fact that Virginia Giuffre is guilty of several criminal offences by her own admission. Number 3, Epstein's trafficking scheme involved recruiting young girls, often by claiming they would be paid $200 for simply providing a massage to a wealthy billionaire. Well, that's a redundancy because all billionaires are wealthy. This same pattern was repeated numerous times with countless children and young women. Well, I would put it to everybody that Virginia Giuffre is rather more experienced and knowledgeable about that aspect of the case than Prince Andrew, and he has quite rightly thrown the ball back into her court by doing the standard legal phrase of Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 3 of the complaint. So in other words, she needs to prove what she's saying. He's not helping her to prove it. That's good legal tactic at play. 4. As United States District Judge Kenneth Mara found, quotes unquote, from between about 1999 and 2007, Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused more than 30 minor girls at his mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, and elsewhere in the United States and abroad. In addition to his own sexual abuse of the victims, Epstein directed other persons to abuse the girls sexually. Epstein used paid employees to find and bring minor girls to him, including, by her own admission, Virginia Giuffre. Epstein worked in concert with others, including Virginia Giuffre, to obtain minors not only for his own sexual gratification, but also for the sexual gratification of others. And then it lists various opinions and orders, blah, blah, blah. And Prince Andrews rightly said, again, he knows, and I'm going to keep it short, he doesn't know anything about it, or he doesn't know enough about it to comment. And so he's not admitting or denying anything. Ball back in court of the complainant. Number 5, like other minor children who came before and after her, the plaintiff was initially recruited to provide massages and thereafter to engage in a variety of sexual acts for Epstein. Plaintiff was required to be on call for Epstein for sexual purposes and frequently travelled with him both nationally and internationally. Plaintiff was regularly abused by Epstein and was lent out by Epstein to other powerful men for sexual purposes. What does that have to do with Prince Andrew in this case? She's laying the ground. It's a big pity fest, and I'm afraid I have a lot of compassion for her when she was younger. But by the time she was 17 and 18, having been a professional prostitute by her own account for years and having lived with a 65-year-old sex trafficker several years before, I'm afraid I would say she was a pro. I don't see the innocence there, nor does any reasonable person. And what has Andrew's lawyers done? They've simply thrown the ball back into her court. Lacks sufficient information to admit or deny. They are not going to be helping her to create this victim narrative, which she is quite determined to create, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. Because And this is evidence out of her own mouth I'm speaking about. Number 6. One such powerful man to whom plaintiff was lent out for sexual purposes was the defendant, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and he categorically denies it. Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 6 of the complaint. 7. Prince Andrew was a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite who spent years overseeing and managing Epstein's sex trafficking network and actively recruited underage girls, including plaintiff. Funny, they've forgotten to say plaintiff then took over by her own account, and this is her account, from Ghislaine Maxwell, and was Epstein's chief recruiter to the tune of 8 and 10 girls and several times a week, and was paid about $4,000 a week by her own account for a period of years. Well, she's rather more expert on this than he is, so what does his lawyer do? Prince Andrew denies the first clause in paragraph 7 of the complaint, namely that he is a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell. Then he continues he lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the remaining allegations contained in that paragraph. So, all back in her court. She is with David Boy's wonderful orchestration, having a concerto of victimhood, despite the fact that there is ample evidence to suggest that if she was a victim at 13, she certainly was no victim by the time she met Epstein, which was very shortly before her 17th birthday, according to her own evidence. Number 8. According to Prince Andrew, he met Epstein through Maxwell in 1999. Prince Andrew thereafter became a frequent guest in Epstein's various homes around the world, including New York City, where he sexually abused plaintiff at Epstein and Maxwell's invitation when she was a minor. She was over the age of consent. She was a minor, but she was, for the purposes of Congress, she had achieved her majority. That's what being over the age of sexual consent means. Andrews, as he admits that he met Jeffrey Epstein in or around 1999, he denies the remaining allegations in paragraph 8. 9. After publicly feigning ignorance about the scope of Epstein's sex trafficking operation and sympathy for Epstein's victims, Prince Andrew has refused to cooperate with US authorities in their investigation and prosecution of Epstein and his co-conspirators. Naturally, Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 9. Completely denies them. It's now up to her to prove them. Of course, will he be given the chance to defend himself? Will material evidence be excluded by Judge Louis A. Kaplan? Time will tell. Number 10, Prince Andrew committed sexual assault and battery upon plaintiff when she was 17 years old, over the age of consent. As such, Prince Andrew is responsible for battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress pursuant to New York common law. The damage to plaintiff has been severe and lasting. I'm sorry for laughing. Millions of dollars later, that gleeful photograph with him where he's just awkwardly posing and she is gleeful. And then she sends the photograph by her own account to her aunt after what she's now alleging was a sexual assault. I mean, also, it's not against New York common law for a 40-year-old man to sleep with a 17-year-old prostitute. It's not against the law. Especially when, according to her, the incident took place in England. Insofar as I'm aware, we are not yet a colony of the United States of America. The United States of America, and certainly New York law, has absolutely no business trying to achieve jurisdiction in this country. Well, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in the first sentence of paragraph 10 of the complaint, namely that he committed sexual abuse, assault and battery. And the remainder of the paragraph amounts to a legal conclusion to which no response is required. That's right. The defendant doesn't have to respond to narrative and legal paintbrushing that any complainant decides they're going to do so that they'll paint a picture which will hopefully allow their hand to be pushed very deep into the pockets of the person they're complaining about. And then, to cover themselves, and the lawyers are very capable, to the extent a response is required, Prince Andrew denies the remainder of the allegations contained in the paragraph 10 of the complaint. 11. This action has been timely filed pursuant to Child Victims Act, New York, blah, blah, blah. The actions described herein constitute sexual offences by defendant under New York Penal Law Article 130. See? They're trying to bring in crimes. And were committed against plaintiff when she was a child less than 18 years of age, for which she suffered physical, psychological, and other injuries as a result. So, of the presumably hundreds, if not thousands, of men who, by her own account, she serviced and got paid tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars from Epstein for servicing. The only one she can come up with at the moment is Prince Andrew. And she suffered physical. Where was the physical? If it happened, and it, according to him, it didn't, but if it did, where was the physical? Where was the psychological? Was the psychological damage that she hoped that by going to bed with a prince, she was going to wake up as a princess? And other injuries? What other injuries? Why isn't she suing Ron Epplinger, or whatever his name was, Eppinger, whatever his name was? Why isn't she suing him? Why isn't she suing her father, who took her to Epstein? Why isn't she suing her family, who signed off on all those trips? Anyway, Andrew's response: the contentions in paragraph 11 of the complaint are legal conclusions to which no response is required. To the extent a response is required, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 11. Then, next section is parties. Number 12. Plaintiff Virginia L. Giuffre is an individual who is a citizen of the state of Colorado. Ha ha. Funny, she's a citizen of the state of Colorado, but she lives in Australia and has lived there for how long? Nearly 20 years? How does that Backward. She's resident in Colorado, suing in New York for something that happened in London, according to her, while living in Australia, and has lived there consistently for nearly 2 decades. Or are we going to have to call in Australian Child Services because she abandoned her underage children? Andrew's answer is, he disputes that Giuffre is domiciled in the state of Colorado and on that basis denies the allegations in paragraph 12 of the complaint. 13. Defendant Prince Andrew is a citizen of the United Kingdom, blah, blah, blah. It's just about where he lives and it's admitted. Jurisdiction and venue. Very interesting, this one. Number 14. The court has diversity jurisdiction over the dispute pursuant to 2080 USC blah blah blah. Plaintiff is a citizen of a state and defendant is a citizen of a foreign state, and the amount in controversy exceeds the sum or value of $75,000, excluding interests and costs. Response? So she's taking yet another stab for why it makes legal sense, not monetary of course, legal sense, to sue in New York, a state she's never lived in. Anyway, paragraph 14 of the complaint consists of legal conclusions to which no response is required. You see how Andrew's lawyers are just batting off all these claims and this narrative? But you need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. They are dismantling, one by one, the bricks upon which this roof floats. Paragraph 14 of the complaint consists of legal conclusions to which no response is required. And again, to the extent a response is required, Andrew disputes and denies, and that the court has subject matter jurisdiction over this dispute on the grounds that Giuffre is not domiciled in California. That's going to be a big fighting point if this gets to court. Let us see what happens. Let us see if Louis A. Kaplan, Clinton appointee, throws a victory to David Boy's Clinton lawyer so that Bill can be protected and Hillary can indulge her complete delusion that she's going to ever become the first female president of America. And of course, who knows, at the rate Joe Biden is going, he may pop off and Kamala might beat her to the punch no matter what. But anyway. 15. Venue is proper in this court as a substantial part of the events or omissions giving rise to plaintiff's claims occurred within this district. Response. So they're trying to say that they have the right to have the case heard in New York because some of the incidents took place, according to her, in New York. Paragraph 15 of the complaint consists of legal conclusions to which no response is required. And again, to the extent to cover themselves at each turn, Andrew's lawyers on his behalf say, to the extent a response is required, he denies the allegations in this paragraph. Number 16. This court has personal jurisdiction over defendant as defendant sexually abused plaintiff in this state and has thus committed a tortious action within this state pursuant to New York's long-arm statute. America has been overreaching itself, I've got to tell you, legally, in trying to claim that anything that happens anywhere in the world it has jurisdiction over, which is getting the rest of the world mightily angry. Anyway, the response is, and there's another bit. Defendant also visited Jeffrey Epstein in this state on numerous occasions. She certainly did. She was earning tens of thousands of dollars by being a prostitute of her own account. Defendant also visited Jeffrey Epstein in this state on numerous occasions. Defendant could reasonably anticipate that the suit based upon his acts and omissions with respect to the plaintiff would result in him being subject to suit in this state, and that suit arises directly out of the defendant's acts or omissions with respect to plaintiff in this state. Well, paragraph 16 of the complaint consists of legal conclusions to which no response is required, according to Andrew's lawyers. To the extent a response is required, he denies the allegations. Factual allegations. Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise is the heading. 17. Jeffrey Epstein was widely renowned as a billionaire who used his vast connections to powerful individuals and seemingly unlimited wealth and resources to create a web of transcontinental sex trafficking that served himself, his co-conspirators, and some of the most powerful people in the world. Well, I have already stated repeatedly that Jeffrey Epstein was a hate figure in my circle, and none of us knew what was going on. And if we didn't know, I don't think it's likely that Prince Andrew would have known either. But that's something else again. Oh, and if Prince Andrew knew, Bill Clinton, who was much closer to him, certainly knew. Certainly. There's no portrait of Prince Andrew that ever was hung in Epstein's New York house, while there was one of Bill Clinton, very droll, mocking portrait of him in Monica Lewinsky's dress. What does that tell you? Anyway, Andrew lacks sufficient knowledge, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to speed up because we now know what comes in terms of blah, blah, blah is lacking sufficient knowledge to admit or deny. And in fact, I'll just say lack sufficient knowledge to admit or deny, or just lack sufficient knowledge. Ghislaine Maxwell is a British socialite and the daughter Hare's more portraiture. They're painting, actually it's not even portraiture, it's a landscape. They're painting a narrative. Ghislaine Maxwell is a British socialite and the daughter of disgraced publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell. Maxwell was the highest-ranking recruiter in Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise. No, Virginia, have you forgotten? Remember what Caroline Adriano said? Do you remember? You don't remember what Caroline Adriano said? You recruited, you trained, you did the whole thing. All Ghislaine Maxwell did was ask her if the massage had gone well, and she said yes. So no, you were Queen Bee. You must not forget that. Maxwell is currently facing criminal charges, etc. Andrew naturally says he lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations, which of course is absolutely true. And it's not his place to comment on any of this. And really, it's totally irrelevant, all of this. But there would be no lawsuit if she didn't drag in every single irrelevancy to try to create a false narrative, at least where Prince Andrew is concerned, according to him. Epstein had perfected a scheme for manipulation and abuse of young females. And you, Virginia Giuffre, you seem to forget, were one of not only the architects of that scheme with him, but you were his gopher. You were his procuress. Anyway, as a part of the scheme, Maxwell or another female recruiter, David Boys, why are you pussyfooting around? Name her. Another female recruiter, Virginia Roberts, would approach a young girl and strike up a conversation in an effort to quickly learn about the girl's background and any vulnerabilities they could expose. Epstein's recruiters found their targets everywhere and anywhere, including schools, spas, trailer parks, and the street. Andrew, of course, lacks sufficient knowledge to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 19 of the complaint, as his lawyer asserts. But I am asserting that Virginia Giuffre has all that knowledge. Let us see what happens if this goes to court. Because unless Louis A. Kaplan is as crooked as a corkscrew, he is going to have to allow her to be questioned on her past bad conduct. She's not ignorant. Why has she forgotten to mention her name? Oh, maybe she doesn't know it anymore. 20. The recruiter would then manipulate the young female into coming back. Here we have, out of the horse's mouth, what happened. And Virginia Giuffre is the horse. The recruiter would then manipulate the young female into coming back to one of Epstein's residencies by offering the young girl something she needed, depending on her situation. In many cases, the recruiter sought out girls who wanted to be professional masseuses and invited them to one of Epstein's homes by offering them what appeared to be legitimate masseuse positions. Virginia, you know all about that, don't you? So I don't know why you're asking Andrew to comment, and his lawyers don't know either. So what have they said? Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in this paragraph. However, wait until this goes to court and Virginia Giuffre is in the witness box. I can tell you they're going to have such fun tearing this complete pretender to shreds. Once in the residence, Epstein and his co-conspirators, welcome Virginia, would work in concert to impress and intimidate the young female with displays of vast wealth and power. They would brag about their connections to very powerful political and social figures and display photographs of themselves with those figures around Epstein's homes. Oh, was your picture with Prince Andrew displayed as well? Or are you excluding yourself? Because, I mean, this rarely has the ring of truth. It's coming straight from the horse's mouth. Virginia, bray. They would normalize the sexual abuse by displaying photographs and art displaying nude females and a massage table and spa-related products in an effort to legitimize the area where the abuse was set to occur. We know all about that, Virginia. We listened to the testimony of Carolyn Adriano a few weeks ago when she was describing what you did, and you did all of this. What does this have to do with Prince Andrew? Well, as his lawyers have pointed out in an elegant way, nothing, because Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in this paragraph, as indeed he would. Even if he'd slept with her, he wouldn't know about it. She was the operator. He wasn't. He was the recipient of her attentions, and by the look of it, the victim of them as well. 22. Once abused, Epstein and Maxwell continued, and this is bad English. It's very bad English, because what they're saying is that once abused, and it really should be once the victims were abused, Epstein and Maxwell continue to manipulate their victims, using their financial power, promises and threats to ensure that the victim returned as directed and remained compliant with their demands. She's laying the ground to say that, yeah, I got hundreds of thousands of dollars from Epstein when I was a teenager, but I was terrified. I was living with my boyfriend. I was driving his Mercedes. I came and went as I pleased. I recruited all sorts of young girls for him, but I was terrified. Mickey, call Megsy, baby. Tell her Motty needs to be consoled. She's finally met somebody who has an even bigger imagination than she does. Epstein and his lawyers would even gather information about the victims to use against them if they ever disobeyed him, and his homes were under constant surveillance. Here's the deal, Virginia. And of course, Andrew lacks sufficient evidence to comment or deny anything in this, which he would. He's not a part of the operation. She was. She's giving great insight into how she performed as a procuress and a prostitute. Great information. She was manipulating those girls, absolutely, but she's also laying the ground for having been so terrified, that she went to Thailand on her own and got married to someone else and lived perfectly happily for years with no trouble from Epstein whatsoever. But she was terrified. How was she terrified? How were any of the other girls terrified? I mean, give me a break, you know? Anybody who's been a genuine victim of circumstance knows that this is not credible. 23. Message pads recovered from trash, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to try to cut this short because it's getting too long. They're now saying about that, well, I'd better read it. Epstein's trash Palm Beach mansion reflect messages that his took to relay to Epstein. They show the constant flow of girls to Epstein, sometimes 3 per day. Yes, Virginia, we all know about that. Prince Andrew doesn't know about that. Those of us who have read what you said know about it. And we've read that you're the girl who supplied them. Epstein's employees have also described young girls constantly being present at Epstein's different homes. Funny, they weren't terrified. Funny, they never made a complaint. Funny, how is it all of a sudden that everybody was in on the know, but nobody did anything? Was everybody colluding? Epstein's constant access to young girls is also evidenced in his Black Book, a book of phone numbers and contact information listing girls to call for massages in various cities. Flight logs documenting his frequent travel with young girls and powerful individuals on his private plane. My goodness, they're really laying it on thick, aren't they? To prove that Epstein, who was a real sleazebag incidentally, and definitely was a corrupter of young girls. But let's not forget, most of these girls were over the age of consent, and according to Carolyn Adriano, who was definitely under the age of consent, Virginia Giuffre is the one who told her, whatever you do, don't let them know your real age. Again, Andrew lacks sufficient knowledge. I'm going to have to start to bounce through this rather more quickly, otherwise this is going to take several hours. Plaintiff became a victim of sex trafficking and repeated sexual abuse after Maxwell recruited her into Epstein's sex trafficking operation when plaintiff was working at the Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, Florida. Well, Andrew quite rightly says he lacks sufficient information to either admit or deny any of those allegations. And they have nothing to do with him. Really. I mean, this overreach. Between 2000 and 2002, Epstein sexually abused plaintiff at numerous locations, including his mansion in this district at 9 East 71st Street, New York, 20021. Andrew, again, lacks sufficient information to either admit or deny. Obviously he does. He wasn't a part of the operation. She has all the information at hand. She was an integral part of the operation. She was his main procuress, according to Carolyn Adriano. Epstein also flew 26 plaintiff on his plane nationally and internationally numerous times when she was under the age of 18. Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 26 of the complaint, including those pertaining to the graphic embedded therein. Well, by her own account, she was flown numerous times on Epstein's private plane. She didn't fly on the back of a bird. She had a passport. Her parents had to sign her in and out. Otherwise, she couldn't have got a passport and she couldn't have been flying without their consent. What does this have to do with Andrew? Nothing, but they're painting a picture of real decadence, and it was real decadence. I mean, there's no doubt that Epstein was a seriously depraved individual and that he was truly despicable. The only doubt that can arise is whether Virginia Giuffre was equally despicable and equally perverse. And I'm not speaking about how she got into the sleaze that she got into, because that happened years before she met Epstein. I'm speaking about the fact that she was well over the age of consent. She was well over the age of reason. If she didn't know that what she was doing was wrong, then she cannot know the difference between right and wrong now. And that means that she is a true sociopath who is incurable and irretrievably compromised. In 27, in addition to being abused by Epstein himself, plaintiff was also forced to have sex with defendant Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, at Epstein and Maxwell's direction. Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations in paragraph 27 of the complaint pertaining to the alleged abuse of Giuffre at the hands of Epstein and denies the remaining allegations contained in this paragraph. There she is, bold as brass, presenting herself as a terrified victim, beaming with delight. And it's not a fake smile. You can tell a fake smile by somebody's facial configuration. And she was so terribly upset that she proudly, boastfully sent the photograph to her aunt. I don't know what sort of a jury they're going to get, but I would imagine that the 12 people will know that 1 and 1 equals 2, and that 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2,227. As part of their sex trafficking efforts, Epstein and Maxwell intimidated plaintiff into remaining silent about what had happened to her. Andrew, of course, again, lacks sufficient information to admit or deny. And to the extent the allegations in this paragraph are predicated on any alleged abuse at the hands of Prince Andrew, he denies the allegations in this paragraph. Well, again, her conduct over a period of years shows that long before she ever met Epstein, she was a practiced prostitute and a wild child. Now, I'm not saying that I don't have sympathy for her if she had been abused when she was a little girl. Of course, one would have sympathy for her. But why should her victims be victimized by her just because she was a victim? And how did Epstein and Maxwell intimidate her into remaining silent? And why did the magical spell of terror break when she was in Thailand and met somebody she fell in love with and is still with? Where did the terror go? And why was she so terrified that she was living with 2 separate boyfriends and a sex trafficker before she met Epstein? I mean, this is such a crock of feces, I can't tell you. The stench. 29. After years of abuse, Epstein sent plaintiff to Thailand in September 2002. One of plaintiff's assignments from Epstein was to bring a young girl back to Epstein in the United States, fearing for her life. Oh, poor Virginia. It's like poor Maxie. These adventuresses are so terrified. Terror is the cheapest shot that certain people can play. And I know, because I have been terrified, and I know people who have been genuinely terrified in their lives. And you don't, when you're terrified, behave the way she is behaving. Fearing for her life and not wanting to subject another young girl to the abuse she was forced to endure. Excuse me? What about the 8 and 10 girls a week, according to Carolyn Adriano, that you were paid $4,000 for over by your own account a 2-year period? What about all of those? Have they magically disappeared? Plaintiff fled from Thailand to Australia to escape from Epstein. No, you didn't. You didn't flee anywhere. You got on a plane and you went with your now husband. You married him after 10 days and you went to Australia. Epstein wished you well by your own account. Epstein wished you well. And if you had been so terrified, what prevented you from walking into a police station? Oh, I know what prevented you. Because the police station wasn't beside the bank. that every week, presumably, you were lodging the £4,000 into an account. Or maybe you didn't lodge it, maybe you just frittered it away. But another question, dear Virginia, did you pay tax on any of that money? Or is the world going to be treated to yet more twisted justice that you're going to be let off the hook, not only for being a sex trafficker and a procuress, but also for cheating on your taxes? Anyway, Andrew, of course, denies that rubbish. Defendant's relationship with Epstein and Maxwell. According to Prince Andrew, he first met Epstein in 1999 through his close friend Maxwell. And I'm going to start to jump some of these. Andrew admits he met Epstein in 1999. He denies the remaining allegations. In other words, he's denying he was a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell. And my understanding is that they were social friends, not close friends. I'll tell you the way it works in royal and aristocratic circles, because maybe friendship is not universally, I should say maybe the categories of friendship are not universal. So I suspect in different walks of life, degrees of friendship are different. In royal and aristocratic life, people have vast social circles. I mean, you might have a party for your 400 closest friends, many of whom are not close friends at all. You might have a party for 2,000 of your social circle, and people used to, and very occasionally still do. They're not close personal friends, and I'm going to break it down for you. You have your close personal friends, then you have friends who are still personal friends, but not that close. And you will have only a handful or two of close personal friends. Then you will have personal friends, maybe 30 or 40, who are not close friends, but they're personal friends. Then you'll have what I suppose some people would call acquaintances, but we would call chums. And you might have 100 of those. Then you have what you would call acquaintances, and we would call people we know. And those number in the thousands, literally. My understanding is that it's absolutely true that Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew were never close personal friends. They were social acquaintances, good enough to go to each other's big parties, good enough to see each other occasionally if they were in the same place. That's not a close friend. So, I suspect I need to make this point because many people reading newspapers and referring to their lives will have far narrower and smaller social circles than people in the royal and aristocratic world have. And they will confuse their close friends with our close friends, and their definition of friendship with our definition of friendship. And the two things are not the same. According to available flight logs, Prince Andrew began flying with Epstein on his private plane as early as 1999, and then it lists where he went. And Prince Andrew is not going to be roped into corroborating as and when he might have flown with Epstein, because it's nothing to do with her claim. She's expanded the boundaries, created new horizons, and his lawyers are quite rightly refusing by saying neither they don't have sufficient information to either admit or deny. 32. Epstein and Maxwell attended Prince Andrew's 40th birthday party. That same year, Prince Andrew threw Maxwell a birthday party in Sandringham, United Kingdom, and Epstein was among the guests. Prince Andrew admits the first sentence, namely that they attended his 40th birthday party, and he denies that the remaining allegations. So in other words, he is denying that he threw her a birthday party at Sandringham. Now, a really interesting one is number 33. In 2006, Prince Andrew invited Epstein to his daughter's 18th birthday party, despite Epstein being charged with procuring a minor for prostitution only 1 month prior. This is important because Prince Andrew didn't know, and nor did most of the people who knew Epstein, that he had been charged with any such offence. That is my information. So, Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations, because they're trying to make out that Andrew was actually condoning Epstein's disgusting behaviour because Andrew knew that he had been charged. Well, they're going to have to prove that Andrew knew that he had been charged, and they can't prove it. Andrew has himself confirmed that he has been on Epstein's private plane, stayed at Epstein's private island, and stayed at Epstein's homes in Palm Beach, Florida, and New York. See Andrew's links to Jeffrey Epstein, BBC News, November 16th, 2019. Andrew admits the first sentence of paragraph 34 of the complaint. Then he lacks sufficient information to admit or deny any allegation pertaining to the authenticity of the BBC article as referenced in paragraph 34. 35. Members of Epstein's house staff have confirmed witnessing Andrew visit Epstein's numerous houses, both to the media and in sworn testimony. Well, again, he neither admits nor denies it. He doesn't have sufficient information. Why would he? He's not going to be interviewing any of them. I mean, they're trying to create a narrative. They're trying to build a case, and he's not assisting them. Defendant's sexual abuse of plaintiff is the next category. 36. Prince Andrew abused plaintiff on separate occasions when she was under the age of 18. Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 36 of the complaint. 37 is in the similar vein. On one occasion, Prince Andrew sexually abused plaintiff in London at Maxwell's home. During this encounter, Epstein, Maxwell and Prince Andrew forced plaintiff, a child, a child who had been a professional prostitute for 4 years by her own account, to have sexual intercourse with Prince Andrew against her will. Well, I'm sorry for laughing. I just think it's an obscenity that this woman can furnish a photograph of her beaming delightedly and send it to her aunt and now be coming up with this crock of feces. Prince Andrew denies the allegation contained in paragraph 37 of the complaint, as he ought to. And may I say at this point, even if they had slept together, it was quite obvious that she was more than willing. And it wasn't against the law. She was not a child for the purposes of Congress. She was an adult. She was over the age of consent. In England, it is 16 years old. When she was 16, she was a professional prostitute. And she was well over the age of 16 at that point. 38. The below photograph depicts Prince Andrew, plaintiff, and Maxwell at Maxwell's house prior to Prince Andrew's sexually abusing plaintiff. Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 38 of the complaint. 39. On another occasion, I should say at this point, they've missed a beat here, Andrew's lawyers, because they should at this point have said, which they do say later, that the photograph, he does not acknowledge that it necessarily was taken at that time. But they do it later, so I suppose, but I believe in double dutching if necessary. Clearly they don't. On another occasion, Prince Andrew sexually abused plaintiff in Epstein's New York mansion in this district. During this encounter, Maxwell forced plaintiff, a child, and another victim to sit on Prince Andrew's lap as Prince Andrew touched her. During this visit to New York, Prince Andrew forced plaintiff to engage in sex acts against her will. I mean, sorry. The girl is, if not 18, nearly 18. She's been a prostitute for years. She's slept on the street. She's lived with a sex trafficker. Nobody told her, you have a complaint to make, go to the police. I mean, how obtuse does she think we are? Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in this paragraph. 40. On another occasion, Prince Andrew sexually abused plaintiff on Epstein's private island in the US Virgin Islands, Little St. James. Andrew denies that allegation. She herself has previously admitted that no such thing took place, and she has actually previously stated that this supposed incident took place at the Zorro Ranch. But irrespective of where it took place, she was over the age of 18, she was over the age of consent. I'm sorry, professional prostitutes provide services. If the John, to use the vernacular, doesn't know that she's actually a pro and that she's being paid, and he's a good-looking 40-year-old, a prince, and she's an eager beaver, 18-year-old. Excuse me, many an 18-year-old has slept with a 40-year-old prince or pauper who was attractive and had a good time. Why would he have thought anything untoward? Did she register any or indicate that she was being forced at the time? By her own account, no. How was he to know if what she is now saying was true? She gave no clues. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. During each of the aforementioned incidents, plaintiff was compelled by express or implied threats by Epstein, Maxwell, and or Prince Andrew to engage in sexual acts with Prince Andrew. I'm sorry, this is just ludicrous. And feared death or physical injury to herself or another, or other repercussions for disobeying Epstein, Maxwell, and Prince Andrew due to their powerful connections, wealth, and authority. Well, I have to say right there, this is a disgraceful display of the class card. This is disgusting. This is the height of irresponsibility, and David Boyce, who is an educated man, should be ashamed of himself if he has any scruples whatsoever for even furthering such a disgusting and obviously reprehensible and false hypothesis. I mean, honestly, she feared death or physical injury from Prince Andrew or an Epstein and Maxwell when she was coming and going freely, lived with her boyfriends. I mean, I would love to get that taught in court and be a lawyer. I would tear her to shreds. I can't stand people who play upon prejudices so flagrantly and for such disgusting things as money. I think they are disgusting and reprehensible in my view. I think it's absolutely unbelievable that a supposedly reputable lawyer has the unmitigated gall to file something like this. No wonder politics is called a dirty business. These people are filthy, absolutely filthy. They are right down there in the sewer with Epstein. And Giuffre. I mean, this woman is a disgrace to humanity. Disgrace. She should be looking to cleanse her soul. Honestly. Of course, Prince Andrew denies all those allegations. During each of the aforementioned incidents, Prince Andrew acted with intent to compel plaintiff's submission. So, in other words, he forced her. My goodness, he forced her. She has her arm, by her own account, around his waist. She is in front of him, beaming with delight in that photograph. And we are to believe that he forced her, when if anybody's displaying reluctance, it's him, not her. Of course, he denies the allegations. Prince Andrew engaged in each of the above-mentioned sexual acts with plaintiff at Epstein and Maxwell's invitation, knowing that she was a sex trafficking victim, being forced to engage in sexual acts with him. How would he have known that, sweetie pie? All those other Johns that you are servicing, did they know? Did you tell them? I'm afraid if you had been so reluctant, you wouldn't have been getting $4,000 a week. Nor would you have, by your own account, been getting $15,000 to make Andrew happy. If you made Andrew happy, how was he to know that you were reluctant? Your story doesn't stack up. Needless to say, he denies the allegations completely. During each of the aforementioned incidents, plaintiff, this is number 44, did not consent to engaging in sexual acts with Prince Andrew. Sorry to be graphic. Did you close your legs? Did you close your mouth? I bet you didn't do either. Otherwise you wouldn't have got the $15,000. Nor would you have been able to tell people that you had managed to get him into bed, showing his reluctance. So, you didn't consent? How didn't you consent? Open legs, open mouth, open pocketbook, and you didn't consent? You really must think people are stupid. Or you're hoping, as is David Boyes, that you're going to pack the jury with a whole load of class prejudiced oiks like yourselves. 45. Each of the aforementioned incidents, during each of the aforementioned incidents, Prince Andrew knew plaintiff's age based on communications from Epstein and Maxwell. He denies that. And even if he did know it, it's a complete irrelevance. Nowhere, according to her narrative, that they had Congress, was it against the law. During each of the aforementioned incidents, Prince Andrew sexually abused plaintiff for the purposes of gratifying his sexual desires. Sweetie pie, that's what Johns and Tots do. It's called a transaction. He denies it, but even if he didn't deny it, it's not against the law in England. And insofar as I'm aware, it's not against the law in America either for a John to be serviced by a Tot. I don't know in New York if it's against the law for a Tot to be paid. In England, it's not against the law if it's done privately. It's against the law in England to run a bawdy house, but it's not against the law to pay or to be paid for favours. During each of the aforementioned incidents, Prince Andrew was acting in his individual personal capacity and was not performing any duty relating to his former role as a trade envoy, any duty relating to his role as a member of the royal family of the United Kingdom, or any official or diplomatic duty or function. Well, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 47 of the complaint and denies that he ever engaged in sexual acts with Jufrey. 48. Defendant's sexual assault and battery of plaintiff have caused her and continue to cause her significant emotional and psychological distress and harm. And I will add on, since she forgot to put it in, and so did David Boyes, that only several $1 million will possibly be able to palliate, and if she runs out of that money, she's going to want to come for another bite of the cherry, because she's just a feeling person. Poor thing. Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 48 of the complaint. I mean, honestly, this is just sickening. I don't know if you find it sickening. I find it sickening. This is a woman who, by her own account, has lied and was a prostitute and has lied about people that she's supposed to have slept with. And this is being treated seriously. Next category, the arrest, prosecution and death of Epstein and Prince Andrew's refusal to cooperate with the authorities. 49. In 2008, Epstein pled guilty in Florida to the charge of procuring a minor for prostitution. The response, Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations. It's irrelevant. It's nothing to do with anything that any claim she has against Prince Andrew. And his lawyers have quite rightly thrown that filthy ball back into her court. 50. In 2010, after Epstein had served his sentence and registered as a sex offender, Prince Andrew was photographed with Epstein in Central Park and stayed at Epstein's New York City mansion. Prince Andrew admits the second clause of paragraph 50 of the complaint. He lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the remaining allegations contained in that paragraph. So he's only admitting what he has to admit, and quite right too. 51. Epstein flippantly referred to his sexual abuse of multiple minors and the slap on the wrist he had received for it in a 2011. Well, may I point out at this stage to all viewers that the sweetheart deal was an official sweetheart deal done by the official authorities in Palm Beach. They didn't have sufficient evidence to do more, and I'm sure they also went easy on him because he was very rich, and at the time, it's changed now, but at the time, if you were very rich, you were given a break. Now it seems the opposite is the case. But I thought it was a disgrace that he had a sweetheart deal like that. However, he did. So, in a 2011 interview with the New York Post, billionaire pervert Jeffrey Epstein is back in New York City and making wisecracks about his just-ended jail stint for having sex with an underage girl. I am not a sexual predator, I'm an offender, the financier told the Post yesterday. It's the difference between a murderer and a person who steals a bagel, said Epstein. Well, it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't. The sweetheart deal gave him the fig leaf with which to cover his crime. Anyway, Prince Andrew, this has nothing to do with Prince Andrew. They're just trying to come up with as much prejudicial information as possible so that the whole case is tried not on what she is alleging happened and he is stating didn't happen, but on everything extraneous. So it's going to be guilt by association. But she, the confirmed, admitted liar and prostitute, is supposed to be believed at all turns. Just crazy. Anyway, Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny. Around the same time, Prince Andrew began to face criticism over his well-publicized friendship with Epstein. Again, he refuses to get involved. He doesn't have sufficient information to admit or deny. And it's got nothing to do with her complaint. What she's trying to do is create a prejudicial environment. 53. In early 2015, after plaintiff had publicly accused Prince Andrew of sexually abusing her, Prince Andrew emailed Maxwell stating, "Let me know when we can talk. Got some specific questions to ask you about Virginia Roberts." Andrew quite rightly says he doesn't have sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations. And why should he? It's up to her to prove her case. 54. On July 2nd, 2019, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York charged Epstein with sex trafficking conspiracy and sex trafficking in violation of 18 blah, 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 blah. Well, again, and this really has nothing to do with Andrew at this point, because he's not even in touch with the man, so he lacks sufficient information to admit or deny any of these allegations. I mean, why should he be making their case for them? 54. Now, Epstein was arrested on July 8, 2019. Again, Andrew doesn't have sufficient information to admit or deny. 56. Epstein was found dead in his cell, and again, Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations. He doesn't need to agree with any of it, even aspects like that. It's not a part of the case. They are dragging in every red herring in the hope that by stinking up the dining room, decent people will leave it. Just 57, just 1 year before his death, Epstein told a New York Times reporter that criminalizing sex with teenage girls was a cultural aberration and that at times in history it was perfectly acceptable. Andrew again lacks sufficient information to admit or deny. And it has to be said that this was Epstein's excuse. And it is also indisputably an anachronism, without a doubt, but that he was justifying his conduct, even when his conduct was reprehensible. Because yes, there have been teenage relationships throughout history, even very recently. But it is always an accepted fact that decent men don't take advantage of vulnerable young girls. End of story. 58. After Epstein's second arrest and death, numerous of his co-conspiracies and the wealthy individuals to whom he trafficked girls, including Prince Andrew, began to face increased public scrutiny for having close ties to a convicted sexual offender. Virginia Giuffre seems to forget that she is the one with Sharon Churchill, and for her greed, who went after Epstein and all of these people to make money, and she is the one who created this and created what is turning out to be this whole scenario. She seems to forget that she has been the architect of a lot of this. It's as if this woman has no ability to see where her personal responsibility in any situation lies. Anyway, Andrew denies that he was a co-conspirator of Epstein or that Epstein trafficked girls to him. He lacks sufficient information, blah, 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 for the rest of it. 59. In 2019, in response to this renewed scrutiny, Prince Andrew sat for an interview with BBC Newsnight. Prince Andrew stated that he did not regret his friendship with Epstein and that he had no recollection of meeting plaintiff, despite photographic evidence to the contrary. And this is where his lawyers nail this. Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegation that there exists photographic evidence of his alleged meeting with Giuffre. Prince Andrew admits the remainder of paragraph 59 of the complaint. He has always maintained, and I've got news for you, it's dead easy when you're a public figure to pose for a picture and not remember that you posed for it. So he could well have posed for it for the blink of an eyelid. Why would he remember? Eager 18-year-old, 17-year-old, young girl, whatever, just another person, just another person, just another acolyte asking for a photograph. And he obliges. Why would he remember? There was nothing to remember. That's his story, and I believe it. I certainly don't believe her. I'd have to see proof, because she's such a liar and she's such a phony. I mean, all those tears and all that wallowing and just playing the victim. It just makes my skin crawl. I mean, anybody who's ever been a victim knows that true victims don't behave like that. Prince Andrew publicly pledged, including in a statement, stepping down from his public duties and in his Newsnight interview to assist the US authorities with their criminal investigation of Epstein and his co-conspirators. Andrew admits that. 61. Despite this public pledge, Prince Andrew has refused to cooperate with US authorities. Former SDNY US Attorney Jeffrey Berman stated that Prince Andrew had provided zero cooperation despite US prosecutors and the FBI contacting Prince Andrew's counsel. Yeah, there's where the politics starts to come in again. Berman, Democrat. Cyrus Vance Jr., Democrat. Bill Clinton? No. Bill Clinton was a great friend, but no. Bill Clinton had nothing to do with any of this, even though she has previously named Bill Clinton, by the way. Anyway, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in the first sentence of paragraph 61, namely that he has refused to cooperate with the US authorities. And then he lacks sufficient information to admit the remaining. Prince Andrew and his counsel, this is number 62 now. Thank God we're coming to the final lap, which I'm afraid is going to take another few minutes, to put it mildly. Prince Andrew and his counsel have also refused to cooperate with counsel for the victims of Epstein's sex trafficking. Counsel for the victims of Epstein's sex trafficking, including counsel for plaintiff, have repeatedly asked for a meeting or telephone call with Prince Andrew and or his representatives to enable Prince Andrew to provide whatever facts, context or explanation he might have, and to explore alternative dispute resolution approaches. Prince Andrew and his representatives have rejected all such requests and responded by escalating their vile and baseless attacks on plaintiff and others. I'm sorry. The gall of people who are self-confessed liars, perjurers, and prostitutes when they seek money and attention. And let's not forget, because she's also under pressure to foment this tremendous disturbance so that she will keep her sorry backside out of jail for the crimes she committed while she was perverting young girls. Anyway, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in that. 63. On July 19th, 2021, counsel for plaintiff proposed a tolling agreement that would have enabled plaintiff not to sue Prince Andrew at this time, while avoiding any argument that her failure to do so caused her claims to be time-barred. Again, Prince Andrew stonewalled, ignoring plaintiff's letter and emails without any reply or response, thereby making this action necessary now. A copy of the July 19, 2021 letter proposing a tolling agreement is attached as Exhibit A of this complaint. I'm going to explain that after I've read the lawyers. The allegations contained in paragraph 60 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions and impermissible legal argument to which no response is required. To the extent a response is required, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in this paragraph and in Exhibit A of the complaint. They are trying to manipulate the situation so that they will be able to say that Prince Andrew was uncooperative. Well, I've got news for you. When you're being jacked up against a wall and you are being publicly accused of something that you have claimed you didn't do and that it's your word against the word of a proven liar, and you've not been proven to be a liar, and you have not been proven to be somebody of ill repute, while your accuser, has been proven to be somebody of ill repute. You don't help them. You don't say to them, oh yes, I'll agree to an extension of time for you to come up with further lies. That is what guilty people would do. 64. In this country, no person, whether president or prince, here we go now, class card being played. Oh, David Boys, multimillionaire, Virginia Giuffre, multimillionaires, are just ordinary people, and they have been taken advantage of. They've got to protect little people like themselves against a big mighty prince who may be grand but doesn't have much money. But anyway, they most likely both have more money than he does, but we'll get to that in a second. In this country, no person, whether president or prince, is above the law, and no person, no matter how powerless or vulnerable, can be deprived of the law's protection. Is that a fact? I think we need to look at some of Judge Kaplan's rulings, and we also need to consider Bill Clinton and Hillary, but let's move on from that. And maybe several other politicians. 20 years ago, Prince Andrew's wealth, power, position and connections enabled him to abuse a frightened, vulnerable child with no one there to protect her. Excuse me, you had yourself. You were an experienced creature of the street and of the night. You didn't need anybody to protect you. People needed to be protected against you, as your conduct is showing. It is long past time for him to be held to account. What about you? You're the one who is the self-confessed pervert and prostitute and trafficker of young girls, and who corrupted young girls, and who sought them out, and by their own account in testimony, you went to great lengths to make sure that they were made to feel comfortable. What about you being held to account? You are the admitted criminal. He's not an admitted criminal. Why aren't you being held to account? Why aren't you asking for yourself to be held to account? The contentions contained in paragraph 64 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions and impermissible legal argument to which no response is required. To the extent a response is required, blah, 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 denies the allegations contained in the paragraph. First cause of action, battery. 65. Plaintiff repeats and realleges the allegations stated above as if fully set forth therein. And Andrew repeats his previous comments. 66. Prince Andrew intentionally committed battery by sexually assaulting plaintiff when she was a minor. You were over the age of consent. You were a minor for some things, but not where sex was concerned. As described above, on multiple occasions, Prince Andrew intentionally touched plaintiff in an offensive and sexual manner without her consent. Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in paragraph 66 of the complaint And I would love to see her on a witness box. Now I can just see now the tears are going to flow. Just loads of tears as she cries and sobs and plays the victim. But she was perfectly happy to pocket the money. Don't go to the police at the time. Spend the money. Entice innocent girls, playing upon their vulnerabilities. Remember what she said about the tactics that she employed and that Epstein's co-conspirators, chief of whom was her, at the time period we're talking about, and the activity we're speaking about, that she was the chief co-conspirator with him in enticing innocent young girls. Unbelievable. Prince Andrew's actions constitute sexual offences. Here we go now. I told you they're trying to set him up for a criminal thing, and here we go. Prince Andrew's actions constitute sexual offences as defined in New York Penal Law Article 130, including but not limited to sexual misconduct as defined in Article 130.20, rape in the third degree as defined in Article 130.25, rape in the first degree as defined blah blah blah, touching, forcibly touching as defined in blah blah blah, sexual abuse blah blah blah, and sexual abuse in the first degree as defined blah 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 blah. And the response is, the allegations contained in paragraph 67 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions to which no response is required, and none is. To the extent a response is required, Prince Andrew denies the allegations contained in this paragraph. Remember what I told you weeks ago, to those of you who've seen this subject discussed by me before? They are desperate to entrap him, to try to get a criminal action on the go. The whole thing is a stitch-up, and it stinks to high heaven. 68. As a direct and proximate result of Prince Andrew's criminal acts, plaintiff has in the past and will in the future continue to suffer substantial damages, including extreme emotional distress, humiliation. Now dear, you can have absolutely no shame to have brought a case like this. Whether he had done it or not, you can have absolutely no shame, and that is my view on it. And I speak as somebody who does have shame, and as somebody who has seen people who are shameless. You can have no shame. So let's not speak about humiliation. Fair. You were so terrified that you couldn't go to the police for years, but you could pocket the money. Psychological trauma. Sorry. Loss of dignity. You have lost your dignity yourself. And esteem and self-esteem. Well, yeah. If you had real self-esteem, you wouldn't be bringing this action. You would be repenting what you had done when you were young, sparing your children the humiliation and the distress to which you have exposed them. This is what you would have done. But of course, let's not forget, you also have your backside to protect and keep out of prison because of the criminal acts to which you have admitted and which you have exposed in your rapacity and greed to acquire the millions that you have acquired through having first prostituted your body. You have since then prostituted your reputation and set yourself up as a victim when you might have been a victim at one point, but you have been a perpetrator for much of it, and certainly all the time that you were with Epstein. Oh, and also she complains about her invasion of her privacy. You've invaded your own privacy. I don't recall that Prince Andrew ever gave interviews invading your privacy. Anyway, the response is, the allegations contained in paragraph 68 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions to which no response is required. To the extent, blah, 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 Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny. Second cause of action, intentional infliction of emotional distress. 69, and we've only got 3 more to go, thank God. Plaintiff repeats and realleges the allegations stated above as if fully set forth therein, and Prince Andrew repeats and reasserts his responses stated above as is fully set forth herein. 70. As a direct result of these allegations, as stated, Prince Andrew committed intentional infliction of emotional distress upon plaintiff. The allegations contained in paragraph 70 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions to which no response is required, and none is. Let her prove it. And I can tell you something, if he's got a good lawyer, there is no way she's going to be anything but torn to shreds. And it's not victim shaming. It is accusing, it is unmasking an accuser who has no justification in playing the victim. 71. Prince Andrew's actions described above constitute extreme and outrageous conduct that shocks the conscience. Well, now the David boys know Virginia Giuffre has displayed one bit of conscience that I can see, so I don't know whose conscience they're speaking about. Certainly it shocks my conscience, and I think it shocks the conscience of anybody who thinks that it's okay for a disturbed former prostitute trust fund babe who has clearly a healthy, in quotes, respect for money and greed for acquiring money, is now so careful to keep herself out of prison for her admitted misconduct that she is trying to pretend that she is a victim and that somebody who I know enough about to know that he is a victim in this circumstance. He's being victimized by her. Who's the victim? That's the question. Prince Andrew's sexual abuse of a child who he knew was a sex trafficking victim, and when he was approximately 40 years old, goes beyond all possible bounds of decency and is intolerable in a civilized community. Excuse me, a 40-year-old prince sleeping with a willing 18-year-old girl and a good-looking man, he might have thought you really liked him. He might have really liked you. Let's take this as you put it. You say he slept with you. You didn't indicate that you were anything but willing. You slept with him. He might have thought you really liked him. He was divorced. He was lonely. He wanted love. He might have thought you were giving him love. It was the beginning of something. And it turned out to be the beginning of nothing. Because you were a prostitute. Or it might have just been 2 ships passing in the night. The fact that he was 40 and you were 18 years old is neither here nor there. I know people who are perfectly happily married where the age difference is 25 and 30 years. So let's keep all of this rubbish out of the equation. Anyway, Andrews is denying this whole lot, but the allegations contained in paragraph 71 of the complaint consist of legal conclusions to which no response is required. To the extent that a response is required, he denies the allegations contained in this paragraph. 72, and we have 2 more. I misjudged it slightly. Prince Andrew knew or disregarded the substantial likelihood that these actions would cause plaintiff severe emotional distress. The allegations contained in 72 consist of legal conclusions and impermissible argument to which no response is required. To the extent a response is required, and to the extent the allegations in this paragraph are predicated on any alleged abuse at the hands of Prince Andrew, he denies the allegations in this paragraph. And the final one, thank God, the sleaziness of it all. As a direct and proximate result of Prince Andrew's criminal acts, plaintiff has in the past and will in the future continue to suffer substantial damages, including extreme emotional distress, humiliation, fear, psychological trauma, loss of dignity and self-esteem, and invasion of her privacy. So that's repeated again. And the allegations, according to Andrew's reply, consist of legal conclusions, no response required. To the extent a response is required, and to the extent the allegations are predicated on an alleged abuse at the hands of Prince Andrew, he denies the allegations. That is it in a nutshell. Very big nut, unfortunately. And to just wrap it up, the document also reiterates the position of the 2009 agreement, which was that Miss Giuffre waived the claims now asserted in the complaint. Another factor the Duke's legal team have asked the court to consider has been the issue of consent. The document reads, assuming without admitting that Giuffre has suffered any injury or damage alleged in the complaint, Giuffre's claims are barred by the doctrine of consent. She would have consented. If she didn't consent, he wouldn't have known that she hadn't consented. Of her own actions, no man sleeps with a woman 3 times in 3 different countries, and if she'd had it her own way, it would have been 4 times in 4 different countries. But that didn't quite work for her narrative, so she cut it down to 3, how generous she is. But the fact of the matter is that if you lead a man to believe that you want to sleep with him, you have given consent. You can't then afterwards spin around and say, well, I didn't really mean it. Crossing your fingers, cross your legs, sweetie pie. And if you don't, please spare us the bleating, because we're not idiots. The Duke also claimed that the case should be barred in whole or in part by her own wrongful conduct. Under the law, she is a prostitute. She is a self-confessed prostitute. She was working as a prostitute. He would not have known to the contrary. And the fact that she worked as a prostitute for the length of time that she worked as a prostitute shows that nobody else either had any idea, and that includes Epstein, that she was unwilling. She was perfectly willing to take the money, perfectly willing to rope in the girls, perfectly willing to hop on a plane, perfectly willing to go to Thailand to pick up a girl that she was being paid by Epstein to traffic. Then she met someone and she fell in love with him. Andrew's lawyers also asserted that Giuffre should not be able to proceed because her claim for damages is too speculative to be recovered at law. That's a legal aspect that it really doesn't behoove us to even bother to go into. But another part of the case is that Giuffre's claims cannot be proven with reasonable certainty, and that would leave the jurors speculating as to any actual damage suffered. Andrew's lawyers have also stated that Giuffre's claims fail to state facts sufficient to constitute viable causes of action against Prince Andrew. The document also states that the claims should be dismissed because Mrs. Giuffre is a permanent resident of Australia. She is not a permanent resident of the United States of America. She has been permanently resident in Australia for nearly 2 decades. The American legal system is making a mockery of itself if it continues with what is patently a stitch-up job and a farce. The whole thing is an outrage and it stinks to high heaven. And hopefully this is the end of it where I'm concerned, and I won't have to address this again, because I find the whole thing supremely distasteful. I feel sorry for girls who end up having to earn their living by selling themselves. One has to have compassion for them, but one's compassion ends when somebody is greedy. There's a big difference between needy and greedy. An 18-year-old selling herself to keep food in her belly is one thing. But an 18-year-old selling herself at forth and selling others, even worse, for $4,000 a week, and that's not greed. I don't know what you call it, but I call it a shocking disgrace. And if she didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and I certainly do, and I think anybody who knows the difference between right and wrong will know that there came a point when she ceased to be a victim. You know, if you get beaten up as a child and you then become a bully and beat up people as an adult, that's not an excuse. If you as a child were interfered with and you then become a pervert in adulthood, that's no excuse. Insofar as I can see, this woman has no excuse except for the fact that she is under pressure to keep herself out of prison. She has got herself involved in a game that she has no control over. Other people have control. I would like to see David Boys, Louis A. Kaplan, President Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and everybody else who has any connection whatsoever to Jeffrey Epstein decide that it is time to stop this farce. Yeah, you don't have to sacrifice an innocent man for your political ambitions or to keep yourself out of prison. I'm sure Virginia Giuffre can be kept out of prison without Prince Andrew's scalp being used And if Hillary doesn't become president, I don't think she has a hope in hell whether Prince Andrew is scapegoated or not. This whole situation is appalling. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and please keep the questions coming in. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.